Welcome to Your Mythology Book Club. I'm Daniel, and I'm a Greek mythology enthusiast. In this series, we're covering the Iliad. In this episode, we'll cover Book 17. In Book 16, we follow Patroclus' story arc through to its tragic conclusion. For several books, we had checked in with him a number of times as his unease grew, watching the Greeks suffer without the aid of his beloved Achilles. This finally boiled over in Book 16, when the Trojans had not only invaded the Greek camp again, but had also managed to set fire to some of the ships. Patroclus couldn't stay quiet anymore. The very survival of the Greeks was at stake. He approached Achilles with the crazy idea that Nestor had planted in his mind. If Achilles wasn't willing to help the Greeks himself, would he allow Patroclus to wear his unique armor, drive his unmistakable divine horses, and lead his men, the powerful and distinctive Myrmidons, to present himself in battle as Achilles and chase the Trojans out of the Greek camp? And that's all Patroclus was supposed to do. Achilles had a bad feeling about all of this, and he warned Patroclus to not attack the city of Troy itself, because he sensed that that would be a step too far for Patroclus and his fate. But in the heat of battle, circumstances got out of control. With the help of Zeus creating the ideal conditions, and Patroclus did exactly what he'd been warned not to do. He assailed the walls of Troy itself, only backing off when Apollo himself scared him off. But it was too late. By attacking the walls, Patroclus had sealed his fate. In the end, it took 3 to kill Patroclus: Hector and another Trojan named Euphorbos, and they only managed to kill him because the god Apollo had first intervened to disarm Patroclus, leaving him vulnerable. Now, because the action in Book 17 can be a little confusing to follow, you may want to make use of the website Homer's Trojan Theater as part of your reading. This is actually the last book this website covers, and it's definitely helpful here. I'm using it in my current reading and as I prepare this script. You'll find the link to this website in the show notes if you're interested. Here in Book 17, the Greeks have to recover Patroclus' body. Its respectful preparation for burial or cremation is absolutely essential for his spirit to rest. His horses, really Achilles' divine horses, made it out with his squire Automedon, but that left Patroclus' body unprotected out there on the battlefield, and his body is still encased in that valuable armor of Achilles, making claiming Patroclus' corpse not just important to the Greeks for religious purposes, but it's now a target for Trojan looters for 2 reasons. One, the financial value of the armor itself, but also the demoralizing effect that taking Patroclus' body away from the Greeks would have on them. And that's where Book 17 opens, the fight over Patroclus' body. Who will step forward from among the Greeks to protect Patroclus' body? And that's answered in the opening lines of Book 17. But Atreus' son, Menelaus, dear to Ares, was not unaware of the slaying of Patroclus by the Trojans in the fray. He went up through the front of the fight, harnessed in flashing bronze, and strode over the body as above a firstborn calf standeth lowing its mother, ere then unused to motherhood. Thus above Patroclus strode fair-haired Menelaus, and before him held his spear and the circle of his shield, eager to slay whoever should encounter him. Menelaus isn't such a bad guy. For a privileged dude, he does this kind of decent thing a number of times throughout the Iliad. He's also got a cameo in the Odyssey where he's very kind to Odysseus' son, and if you read Euripides' Helen, you'll see a Menelaus there who's okay with playing second fiddle to a really clever and strong Helen. Menelaus can be a hero without insisting on being the star of the show. That's what I admire about him. Anyway, who comes right up to Menelaus and says, "Hey, how about you just give me Patroclus' dead body?" none other than Euphorbos. If you don't remember him, that's okay. He's the unremarkable Trojan who only managed to wound Patroclus towards the end of Book 16, only managed to wound Patroclus despite the fact that Apollo had just disarmed and disarmored him a moment before. The nerve of this guy. You've got to hear what this non-entity Euphorbos says to Menelaus. Atreus' son Menelaus, Zeus fostered, captain of the host, give back and leave the body and yield the bloody spoils. For before me was there none of the Trojans and their famed allies who smote Patroclus with the spear in the stress of fight. Wherefore yield me this fair glory to win among the Trojans, lest I hurl and smite thee, and bereave thee of sweet life. There is zero chance that Menelaus is going to just let this chump, Euphorbos, take Patroclus and the armor. Menelaus reminds Euphorbos that he's previously killed his brother, Hyperenor, who had just gotten married shortly before coming to the war. And Menelaus says he doesn't think Euphorbos will fare any better against him than his brother did. And this just fires up Euphorbos, who's thinking of his father Panthous and his mother Phrontis, his dead brother Hyperenor, and his brother's widow when he responds. Now, therefore, Zeus fostered Menelaus, thou shalt in very deed pay for my brother, whom thou slewest, and boastest over. And therewithal didst leave his wife a widow in her new bridal chamber afar, and to his parents broughtest lamentation unspeakable and woe. Verily to those hapless twain shall I be for a withstaying of their lamentation, if I shall carry back thy head and armor, and lay them in the hands of Panthous and noble Phrontis. But now no longer shall the struggle be untried or unfought, whether for victory or for rout. With that, Euphorbos attacks Menelaus, and it does not go well for him. Menelaus raises his shield, and Euphorbos' spear is broken against Menelaus' shield. Now it's Menelaus' turn to attack, and he only needs the one turn. With a prayer to Zeus, Menelaus' spear tears through his opponent's throat, sending Euphorbos crashing to the ground, and his armor ringing upon him, for a moment, until Menelaus loots it off him. Seeing this savage defense of Patroclus, no Trojan is willing to face Menelaus. And that's how the defense would have ended. The narrator lets us know that Menelaus would have now been able to remove Patroclus' body and that valuable armor off the battlefield, if not for the intervention of Apollo at this point. Then easily would the son of Atreus have borne off the noble spoils of Panthous' son, had not Phoebus Apollo grudged it him, and aroused against him Hector, peer of swift Ares, putting on the semblance of a man, of Mentes, chief of the Cicones. And he spake aloud to him winged words, Hector, now art thou hasting after things unattainable, even the horses of wise Iacides. For hard they are to be tamed or driven by mortal man, save only Achilles, whom an immortal mother bare. Meanwhile hath warlike Menelaus, Atreus' son, stridden over Patroclus and slain the best of the Trojans there, even Panthous' son Euphorbos, and hath stayed him in his impetuous might. As always happens when a divine ally comes up to a warrior, that warrior is left with renewed vigor, strength, and will to fight. This time is no different. Hector is all like, let's go! And Hector shouts aloud in a voice that's said to be like Hephaestus' unquenchable flame. Wait, that seemed like a weird simile to say a sound is like fire, which is more remarkable for being bright or hot than for its sound usually. So I had to pause my reading here and go comparing translations. What I read aloud just now, that was the quote in Green's translation, like Hephaestus' unquenchable flame. And I checked the Lang, Leaf, and Myers, that's the translation that I read to you on this podcast because it's out of copyright. And it similarly reads, like Hephaestus' flame unquenchable. So similarly confusing and tough to think that Homer would have written that, or if he had, then I'd have expected some footnote explaining some aspect of Greek culture to help me understand this weird simile. So finally I got to the Lattimore and found this makes much more sense here than the others. So if you have the Lattimore translation, book 17, lines 87 to 89 read, of Hector, he stalked through the ranks of the champions, helmed in the bright bronze, with a shrill scream and looking like the flame of Hephaestus, weariless. Nor did Atreus' son fail to hear the sharp cry. That makes a lot more sense to me. It's not often that I have to pause my reading, but that comparison just didn't make sense to me, and I couldn't move forward without clearing that up. I'm going to go with Lattimore on this one, but I do have to stick with an out-of-copyright translation for the bulk of my quotes, and certainly all of the longer ones, which, as always, come from the 1918 Lang, Leaf, and Myers. So, to resume, Menelaus had been about to pull Patroclus' dead body out of the fight when he hears Hector's battle cry. Hector's just been all fired up for the battle, yet again, by Apollo. Menelaus thinks to himself, "Ay me, if I shall leave behind these goodly arms, and Patroclus, who here lieth for my vengeance' sake, I fear lest some Danaan beholding it will be wroth against me. But if for honor's sake I do battle alone with Hector and the Trojans, I fear lest they come about me many against one. For all the Trojans is bright-helmed Hector leading hither. But wherefore thus debateth my heart? When a man against the power of heaven is fain to fight with another whom God exalteth, then swiftly bringeth on him mighty woe. Therefore shall none of the Danaans be wroth with me, though he behold me giving place to Hector, since he warreth with gods upon his side. But if I might somewhere find Aias of the loud war cry, then both together would we go, and be mindful of battle, even were it against the power of heaven, if haply we might save his dead for Achilles, Peleus' son. That were the best among these ills." So Menelaus is conscious of the fact that the Greeks are all here fighting on his behalf, fighting to return his stolen wife Helen and right the wrong done upon him personally by Paris. And he's maybe feeling it a bit too personally, since he was also a signatory to the oath that Odysseus convinced Helen's father to make all of her suitors take, that they would all defend the right of the selected husband to keep her. But Menelaus is a sensitive soul, and so his worries next wander off to the fact that the gods often support one fighter against another, and that spells doom for the fighter without divine support. And right now it sure likes Hector once more has divine support. So Menelaus thinks to look for Aias to help him so he's not standing alone. As Menelaus debates these things in his mind, Hector comes forward at the head of a group of Trojans, and Menelaus gives way, abandoning the body and armor of Patroclus. Really, it's the armor of Achilles, remember, but with the notion that he'll look for Aias to help him recover them. Menelaus does soon find Aias way off on the edge of the battle, just cheering on the other Greeks. Way to go! Apollo had put fear into Aias' heart, you see. But with Menelaus' encouragement, Aias will now join him to help recover Patroclus. So now Aias and Menelaus approach Hector together, who by this time has removed the armor from Patroclus' body and was busy dragging the body, about to cut the head off so he could keep it as a trophy and give the body to the dogs to eat. Gross! And something we might have thought Hector was above. Hector is becoming a worse version of himself as time goes on. Let's keep his willingness to defile a corpse in mind for a bit later, when this will become relevant. In the meantime, Aias confronts Hector, bearing his great tower shield. This confrontation is all the warning Hector needs. He abandons the corpse of Patroclus, hops back up into his chariot, and is gone from the scene, leaving with that valuable armor. Now, Aias covers Patroclus with that great shield and stands before the shielded body, challenging by his defensive posture any enemy. By him stands Menelaus, the two of them ready to defend Patroclus. The scene now shifts to behind the Trojan lines, where Glaucus, still grieving over the loss of his friend Sarpedon, finds Hector, who has just now fled the battle with his prize, the armor of Achilles, and abandoned the fight over the body of Patroclus, which would have been another great prize in itself. Glaucus, now the leader of the allied Lycians with the death of Sarpedon, is not impressed with Hector's behavior and lets him know it. Hector, in semblance bravest, lo, in battle sorely art thou lacking. Verily in vain doth fair glory rest on thee, since thou turnest runagate. Bethink thee now how thou shalt save thy city and home, thou only with the host who were born in Ilios. For of the Lycians at least shall none go up to fight against the Danaans for the city's sake, since no boon, it seemeth, is it to fight unsparingly ever against men of war. How art thou like to bring back safe into thy host any lesser man, thou heart of heart, when Sarpedon, that was both guest and friend, thou leftest to the Argives to be their prey and spoil? Though in his life he aided oftentimes both thy city and thyself. Yet now thou hast not dared to save him from the dogs. Therefore now, if any of the men of Lycia will hearken unto me, we will go home, and to Troy shall be revealed sheer doom. For if now a spirit of good courage were in the Trojans, a fearless spirit such as entereth into men who for their native land array toil and strife against men that are their enemies, speedily should we drag Patroclus within Ilios' wall. And if this dead man were brought into the great city of King Priam, and we drew him forth from the battle, then speedily would the Argives give back the goodly armor of Sarpedon. And we should bring his body into Ilios, so great is he whose squire is slain. Even the man who is far best of the Argives beside the ships, he and his close fighting squires. But thou endurest not to stand up against great-hearted Aias, and to look in his face amid the cry of the men of war, nor to do fair battle with him, since he is a better man than thou. Glaucus is bitter, obviously. Bitter that Sarpedon's armor was taken by the Greeks, and he feels that Hector abandoned the fight over the body of Patroclus too soon. In Glaucus' mind, he can envision them taking the body of Patroclus into the city of Troy and holding that body ransom until the Greeks give back Sarpedon's armor. For Glaucus, this is at least as much about a way to honor his dead friend as it is about the value of the armor itself. And Glaucus is reminding Hector that he and his allied Lycians don't even have to be here. It's not their city that's threatened with destruction. The exchange Glaucus is proposing is clear enough even if it's not explicitly spoken. Help me recover Sarpedon's armor by getting Patroclus' body to use as a bargaining chip, or I'll take the Lycians home and leave you without one of your most powerful allied nations. Hector does not like being insulted by Glaucus, but the taunting works. Hector proudly announces, Glaucus, wherefore hath such an one as thou spoken thus over measure? Out on it, I verily thought that thou in wisdom wert above all others that dwell in deep-soiled Lycia. But now I think altogether scorn of thy wisdom, since thou speakest thus, and sayest that I dared not to meet the mighty Aias. No terror have I of battle or din of chariots, but the intent of aegis-bearing Zeus is ever strongest, and even a brave man he overaweth, and lightly snatcheth from him victory, and yet anon himself arouseth him to fight. Come hither, friend, stand beside me, and see my handiwork, whether all this day I shall play the coward according to thy words, or shall yet stay certain of the Danaans, how fierce soever be their valor, from doing battle for Patroclus' corpse. Thus saying, he called on the Trojans with a mighty shout, Trojans and Lycians and Dardanians that fight hand to hand, be men, my friends, and bethink you of impetuous valor, until I do on me the goodly arms of noble Achilles that I stripped from brave Patroclus when I slew him. Hector is offended with Glaucus' implication that he's afraid of battle. The detailed nuances of Glaucus' argument about taking Patroclus' body for bargaining and Glaucus' desire to honor Sarpedon, that is all lost to Hector right now. Hector is in a battle rage. He is not thinking clearly. He is not the Hector we saw early on in the Iliad, the one speaking kindly to Helen, the one in Book 6 playing with his young son. This is a Hector who's had the kindness burned out of him. He runs off now and stops the Trojans who are carrying Achilles' armor to the city and has them carry his own armor instead, because here, this Hector, battle-addled, enraged, desperate even to save his city, this Hector makes a mistake. He now puts on the armor of Achilles. This mistake will cost him dearly. Like Patroclus attacking the city of Troy, this is the action that seals Hector's fate. And now the scene shifts briefly to Olympus, or to the top of Mount Ida, wherever Zeus is right now, where he's watching the war. And Zeus sees Hector putting on Achilles' armor, and he says out loud, Ah, hapless man, no thought is in thy heart of death that yet draweth nigh to thee. Thou doest on thee the divine armor of a peerless man before whom the rest have terror. His comrade, gentle and brave, thou hast slain, and unmeetly hast stripped the armor from his head and shoulders. Yet now, for a while at least, I will give into thy hands great might, in recompense for this, even that no wise shalt thou come home out of the battle, for Andromache to receive from thee Pelides' glorious arms. Thus spake the son of Cronos, and bowed his dark brows therewithal. But the armor fitted itself onto Hector's body, and Ares, the dread war god, entered into him, and his limbs were filled with valor and strength. Then he sped among the noble allies with a mighty cry, and in the flashing of his armor he seemed to all of them like unto Peleus' great-hearted son. Putting on the armor of Achilles has sealed Hector's fate. It's a prideful act, and because of it, Hector won't make it home again. That family scene he had back in Book 6, the sweet scene where Hector finds his wife Andromache and their little son, Astyanax, who is scared of his father until he removes that helmet, and then is delighted to see Hector smiling where the terrifying bronze helmet has been. It was like a Bronze Age peekaboo. There won't be any more moments like that for Hector and for his family. By bowing his brows, that divine head nod is Zeus making his own promise to himself, and he's sad to do it. But this is Hector's fate, and it's approaching rapidly now. But what a glorious fate it is, for the moment at least. With Ares joining him, Hector enters the battle with a mighty war cry, and it seems to the Trojans that Achilles himself is here, but on their side now. Hector gathers them about himself, the leaders of the Trojans and their numerous allies, Mesphles and Glaucus and Medon and Thersilocos and Steropeos and Deisenor and Hippothoos and Phorkys and Chromios and the augur Enomos, and shining brilliant as a young god in the dawning of the world, Hector says to them all, "Listen ye, countless tribes of allies that dwell round about. It was not for mere numbers that I sought or longed when I gathered each of you from your cities, but that ye might zealously guard the Trojans' wives and infant little ones from the war-loving Achaeans. For this end am I wearying my people by taking gifts and food from them, and nursing thereby the courage of each of you. Now, therefore, let all turn straight against the foe and live or die, for such is the dalliance of war. And whoso shall drag Patroclus, dead though he be, among the horse-taming men of Troy, and make Aias yield, to him will I award half the spoils, and keep just half myself. So shall his glory be as great as mine." And now, upon Aias and Menelaus, standing astride the body of Patroclus, come the full force of the Trojans, with Hector at their fore. And without fear for themselves, but reasoning that the numbers are simply against them, Aias believes that they will not make it out of this alive. But fearing instead that the body of Patroclus will become dishonored in the hands of the Trojans, Aias says to Menelaus, "Dear Menelaus, fosterling of Zeus, no longer count I that we two of ourselves shall return home out of the war. Nor have I so much dread for the corpse of Patroclus that shall soon glut the dogs and birds of the men of Troy, as for thy head and mine, lest some evil fall thereon. For all is shrouded by a storm cloud of war, even by Hector, and sheer doom stareth in our face. But come, call thou to the best men of the Danaans, if haply any hear." And, as he's done before, Menelaus calls out loud for aid to any Greeks that might hear him. "O friends, ye leaders and counselors of the Argives, who by the side of the sons of Atreus, Agamemnon and Menelaus, drink at the common cost, and are all commanders of the host, on whom wait glory and honor from Zeus. Hard is it for me to distinguish each chief amid the press. Such blaze is there of the strife of war. But let each go forward of himself, and be wroth at heart that Patroclus should become a sport among the dogs of Troy." And quickly his call is answered by Oilean Aias, and by the Cretans, Idomeneus and Meriones. These three join Telamonian Aias and Menelaus before the Trojans close in. These 5 Greeks now stand round the body of Patroclus, their bronze shields pressed together as a wall, and Zeus himself casts now upon them a darkening mist, a defense to protect and honor the dead Patroclus. The fight for Patroclus now begins in earnest, under an unnatural darkness localized to just this area of the battlefield. The Trojans come upon them like a raging river, and the Greeks get momentarily pushed back. But Aias the Greater immediately rallies the Greeks and leads them in a charge that breaks through the Trojan line and scatters them. A Trojan ally named Hippothous has snuck up and tied a leather thong around Patroclus' ankles, as now he's pulling the corpse toward the Trojan line. The Trojans and Hector see this and they love it, but they're all so busy fighting the Greeks. So Hippothous is at it alone, dragging this heavy corpse, and is too distracted by his work to see Aias come storming through the press of battle, right at him, spear raised. Aias' weapon crashes down upon Hippothous' helmet, splitting the entire helmet and erupting his brains out on the ground. Busy as he was in battle, Hector sees this and turns, quickly launching a spear at Aias, who sees this coming and dodges. The spear passes by him harmlessly, but it kills a Greek named Skedios instead. Skedios was from the very ancient, even by ancient Greek standards, town of Panopeus, which was along the sacred way to the temple of Apollo at Delphi. I'm going to go off on one of my little digressions here. There were certain roads to temples of Apollo thought of as sacred ways. Panopeus is also interesting because there was a legend that humanity was formed by the god Prometheus from the sand or clay-colored stone found at this place. And as evidence for this amazing claim, the ancient travel writer Pausanias says that the locals attested this stone smells like the flesh of a man. That's a weird but fascinating little piece there, the notion that we all come from Panopeus, town of distinctly human-smelling rocks. I've put links in the show notes, both to the text from Pausanias, as well as an article by Marcel Detienne that gives more information about the sacred ways of Apollo, and one by a writer named Harris that's pretty dated. It has some wild and I think pretty speculative stuff on Apollo and pilgrimages to Apollo shrines. Very interesting, but I would take the Harris article with a grain of salt. Check it out though, fascinating. Anyway, back to battle. Aias, having dodged Hector's cast spear, now assails the Trojan Phorcys, breaking through the armor covering his abdomen and spilling his guts out literally. The Trojans now back off at this gruesome scene, while the Greeks cheer and take advantage of the opportunity to strip both Hippothous and Phorcys of their armor. Now the narrator lets us know that the Greeks would have been able at this point to chase the Trojans back into the city if Apollo, again it's Apollo, hadn't chose this moment to put strength into Aeneas. Apollo shows up to Aeneas in the form of an elderly servant of his father and says, "Aeneas, how could ye ever guard high Ilios if it were against the will of God? Other men have I seen that thrust in their own might and power and valor and in their host, even though they have scant folk to lead. But here, albeit Zeus is fainer far to give victory to us than to the Danaans, yet ye are dismayed exceedingly and fight not." Immediately upon hearing this, Aeneas somehow knows it's Apollo. I kind of wonder sometimes about the various disguises of the gods. There are numerous examples of gods using disguises throughout the Iliad, and quite a few different permutations of how the gods' use of disguises goes as far as, is the disguise effective as a disguise, as here it wasn't, or just basically a costume that the god is wearing for no discernible reason, and another variable, which is whether or not the interaction has the desired outcome the god wanted, regardless of the disguise's effectiveness. And there are some extreme examples, one in particular still to come I'm thinking of, where the disguise is pretty actively a deception, and an effective one at that. We'll get to that. I don't want to spoil it. The current situation here with Aeneas and Apollo, disguised as his father's servant, is one of the milder examples of divine disguise. This disguise is ineffective as a disguise, but that doesn't really matter because the desired effect of the interaction is just the same, with the human target getting all re-fired up for battle, as is the intention in the vast majority of these interactions. So, what was the point of the disguise at all? I'd almost want to go through the Iliad and pick out all the instances, look for some patterns, but I suspect that there isn't really any consistency or purpose most of the time, so it's probably not worth my effort. Anyway, Aeneas is again all fired up and announces, "Hector, and ye other leaders of the Trojans and their allies, shame were this if in our weakness overcome we were driven back into Ilios by the Achaeans dear to Ares. Nay, thus saith a god, who standeth by my side, Zeus, highest orderer, is our helper in this fight. Therefore let us go right onward against the Danaans. Not easily at least let them take the dead Patroclus back to the ships." Not much of a speech, not really that inspiring. I'm always a little underwhelmed by Aeneas, who now leaps to the front of the Trojans, and they rally around him. Aeneas now wounds a Greek named Leokritos. Not a very remarkable guy, but friends with another Greek named Lycomedes. He's someone we've come across here and there throughout the Iliad. Lycomedes is, of course, angered and throws his spear, ending up killing a Trojan ally from Paeonia named Apisaon. This ticks off Apisaon's friend Asteropaios, who wants to get revenge, but by now the Greeks have formed a strong circle again around the body of Patroclus, with Aias ranging among the Greeks, commanding them to stand firm. And while Trojans and Greeks were falling in the continuing battle around Patroclus, it was the Trojans who were getting the worst end of things and falling more thickly. The narrator here reminds us that the body of Patroclus is still surrounded by the darkness cast by Zeus in grief for the death of that hero, while elsewhere on the battlefield it's still daytime. Thus strove they as it had been fire, nor wouldst thou have thought there was still sun or moon. For over all the battle where the chiefs stood around the slain son of Menoetios, they were shrouded in darkness, while the other Trojans and well-greaved Achaeans fought at ease in the clear air, and piercing sunlight was spread over them, and on all the earth and hills there was no cloud seen, and they ceased fighting now and again, avoiding each other's dolorous darts and standing far apart. But they who were in the midst endured affliction of the darkness and the battle, and all the best men of them were wearied by the pitiless weight of their bronze arms. The narrator breaks in briefly to note that the two sons of Nestor, Antilochus and Thrasymedes, are fighting elsewhere in the battle and unaware that Patroclus has died. Then the description of the battle over Patroclus continues. Thus all day long waxed the mighty fray of their sore strife, and unabatingly ever with the sweat of toil were the knees and legs and feet of each man, and arms and eyes bedewed, as the two hosts did battle around the brave squire of fleet Iacides. And as when a man giveth the hide of a great bull to his folk to stretch, all soaked in fat, and they take and stretch it standing in a circle, and straightway the moisture thereof departeth, and the fat entereth in under the haling of many hands, and it is all stretched throughout. Thus they on both sides haled the dead man this way and that in narrow space, for their hearts were high of hope, the Trojans so that they should drag him to Ilios, and the Achaeans to the hollow ships. And around them the fray waxeth wild, nor might Ares, rouser of hosts, nor Athene despise the sight thereof, albeit their anger were exceeding great. But not as yet knew noble Achilles aught of Patroclus' death, for far away from the swift ships they were fighting beneath the wall of the men of Troy. Therefore never deemed he in his heart that he was dead, but that he should come back alive, after that he had touched the gates. For neither that other thought had he anywise, that Patroclus should sack the stronghold without his aid. The battle over Patroclus is continuing, with neither side willing to give up. Possession of his remains becomes a microcosm, a stand-in for the whole war. Either side could give up at any time. Either side could simply say it's not worth it. The Trojans could just give back Helen and her treasures. The Greeks could just realize that maybe Helen had made her decision and sail on back home. But neither would do so in the larger war, nor in this microcosm over the Battle of Patroclus. Now the scene shifts to Automedon, who had been Patroclus' squire and had escaped from the fighting in the chariot pulled by the two surviving horses of Achilles. Those are the two immortal horses, Xanthos and Balios. But Automedon hadn't left the battlefield. He just got those valuable horses out of harm's way. And so over here, away from the fighting, we find that the immortal horses are just overcome with grief for the death of Patroclus. In addition to being immortal, these horses seem to have a great intelligence and awareness, and are neither willing to go back into the battle, nor to go back to the ships, where they must realize that the death of Patroclus would become evident to Achilles. And Automedon is unable to get them to do anything. He tries beating them, he tries kind words, but they're weeping, they're inconsolable. From his perch, high above a mountain, Zeus's eyes spot these horses in their grief, and as a fellow immortal, with his own emotional burdens that can never be put down. Zeus's heart goes out to them, and he says to himself, "Ah, hapless pair, why gave we you to King Peleus, a mortal man, while ye are deathless and ever young? Was it that ye should suffer sorrows among ill-fated men? For methinketh there is nothing more piteous than a man among all things that breathe and creep upon the earth. But verily, Hector, Priam's son, shall not drive you and your deftly wrought car. That I will not suffer. Is it a small thing that he holdeth the armor and vaunteth himself vainly thereupon? Nay, I will put courage into your knees and heart, that ye may bring Automedon also safe out of the war to the hollow ships. For yet further will I increase victory to the men of Troy, so that they slay until they come unto the well-timbered ships, and the sun set and divine night come down." With this, Zeus puts courage into the horses, and they shake the dust and tears off themselves, and they pull the chariot containing Automedon back into the fighting. And Automedon tries fighting from the chariot, but with the horses darting here and there kind of aimlessly throughout the battle, Automedon can't really do anything. Without someone to control these horses, to direct them towards the Trojan he wants to attack, it's useless. He's just being driven randomly around in the battle. A Myrmidon named Alcimedon sees all this happening, this useless chariot zooming around, and he calls out to Automedon, "Automedon, what god hath put into thy breast unprofitable counsel, and taken from thee wisdom, that thus alone thou art fighting against the Trojans in the forefront of the press? Thy comrade even now was slain, and Hector goes proudly, wearing on his own shoulders the armor of Aeacides." And Automedon calls back from this zooming chariot, "Alcimedon, what other Achaean hath like skill to guide the spirit of immortal steeds, save only Patroclus, peer of gods in council, while he yet lived? But now have death and fate overtaken him. But take thou the lash and shining reins, and I will get me down from my horses so that I may fight." Automedon just wants to fight. He feels rage and he feels guilt, and he wants to atone for the loss of Patroclus by spilling some Trojan blood. With Alcimedon to take over the chariot, Automedon jumps down from the chariot to fight hand to hand, and really to engage with his emotions, a violent but cathartic way to deal with his grief and guilt. As for the divine horses Xanthos and Balios, remember, it's really hard, if not impossible, for anyone other than Patroclus or Achilles to control these immortal horses. They're divine animals with powerful wills, noble and unwilling to be controlled by most mere humans. It's not clear if Alcimedon, Myrmidon though he is up to the task. Automedon wasn't. And now Hector, who has already dared to don the armor of Achilles, now sees Xanthos and Balios. You might remember the episode known as the Dolonea, much earlier, when that Trojan spy Dolon foolishly thought he could get these same horses for himself. Dolon was a worse man than Hector in every way, but it's still not okay for even Hector to covet something that's immortal. Mortals knowing their place is an important theme in Greek mythology, and so many of the most famous punishments of mortals are for reaching for or comparing themselves to the immortals. From Niobe, who bragged that she had more children than Leto, the mother of Apollo and Artemis, to Ixion, lusting after Hera while he was a guest of Zeus. So now, foolishly, Hector wants those amazing animals, Xanthos and Balios, for himself, and he thinks this might be his opportunity. So, Hector says to Aeneas, "Aeneas, counselor of mail-clad Trojans, I espy here the two horses of fleet Aeacides come forth to battle with feeble charioteers. Therefore might I hope to take them if thou in thy heart art willing, since they would not abide our onset and stand to do battle against us." Now Hector and Aeneas, along with a couple other guys named Chromios and Aretos, advance on Automedon, who must be nervous at this development because he calls up to Alcimedon, who's on the chariot, "Alcimedon, hold the horses not far from me, but with their very breath upon my back. For I deem that Hector, the son of Priam, will not refrain him from his fury until he mount behind Achilles' horses of goodly manes, after slaying us twain, and dismay the ranks of Argive men, or else himself fall among the foremost." Thus said he, and called upon the Iontes and Menelaus. "Iontes, leaders of the Argives, and Menelaus, lo now, commit ye the corpse unto whoso may best avail to bestride it, and resist the ranks of men, and come ye toward the day of doom from us who are yet alive. For here in the dolorous war are Hector and Aeneas, the best men of the Trojans, pressing hard. Yet verily these issues lie in the laps of the gods. I too will cast my spear, and the rest shall Zeus decide." So, here's what I'm thinking. On the one hand, it was noble of Automedon to want to rejoin the fight, and he's got a lot of very personal, emotional reasons why he, in particular, wants to avenge the death of Patroclus and to not be the one to carry the news back to Achilles, at least not without racking up a decent kill count first to show Achilles that he's suitably torn up about Patroclus' death. But on the other hand, by leading those valuable horses right under Hector's nose, he's introduced another thing that the Greeks have to defend. And they were already still having to defend Patroclus' body. Remember, they hadn't yet been able to secure his body and get it beyond the Trojans' reach, with Menelaus and Aias even now still fighting off the Trojans trying to grab Patroclus. And the Greeks had already lost Achilles' armor, which Hector is wearing against them right now. And now, here's Automedon risking losing horses that are literally divine, immortal horses, something that cannot be replaced for any amount of money in the world. I'm not 100% on board with his decision here. But then again, I can't say that I'm 100% on board with a lot of the decisions these guys make, and besides, we're here now, and it's too late to back out. Hector is coming on against us. As for Automedon's line about "ward the day of doom from us who are yet alive," dude, you're barely a named character. They are not going to abandon Patroclus' body to defend you. Give me a break. Do something that makes the trouble of your appearance here worthwhile. With that last statement of Automedon's about casting his spear and letting Zeus decide, Automedon did cast a spear, and it broke right through the shield carried by Aretos and into his belly. So Automedon did do something worthwhile after all. One opponent down, 3 to go. Now Hector casts a javelin at Automedon, and Automedon really pulls off a badass move here, something worthy of reporting back to Achilles. He stares the javelin down, stares right at it as it flies towards his face, ducking only at the last moment, and it lands quivering in the ground behind him. In the face of this extreme badassery, Hector and Aeneas and Chromios back off while Automedon strips Aretos of his valuables while saying to himself, "Verily, I have a little eased my heart of grief for the death of Menoetius' son, albeit a worse man than he have I slain." With bloody hands, Automedon puts the spoils into the chariot and resumes fighting. A quick scene shift now to Zeus, sending Athene into the battle to aid the Greeks, putting into the sky as a symbol a rainbow. We've discussed previously how the rainbow to ancient Greeks wasn't the purely positive sign it is to us. It was a sign of unstable weather, violence, and terror. So again, above Patroclus was waged the violent fray, cruel and woeful, and Athene roused their strife, from heaven descended, for far-seeing Zeus sent her to urge on the Danaans, for his mind was changed. As Zeus stretches forth a gleaming rainbow from heaven to be a sign to mortals, whether of war or of chill storm, that maketh men to cease from their works upon the face of the earth, and afflicteth flocks, Thus Athene, clothing her in a gleaming cloud, entered the Achaeans' host, and roused each man thereof. Now on the battlefield, Athene takes the form of Phoenix, the old teacher of Achilles, and she comes thus disguised to Menelaus, who, along with Aias, is still defending the body of Patroclus, this whole time in a stalemate, keeping the Trojans from getting Patroclus, but unable to fend them off long enough to get Patroclus's body off the battlefield. So Athene, again disguised as Phoenix, says to Menelaus, "To thee, verily, Menelaus, will it be shame and reproach if beneath the wall of the men of Troy fleet dogs tear the faithful comrade of proud Achilles? Nay, bear thee stoutly up, and urge on all the host." Then answered her Menelaus of the loud war cry, saying, "O Phoenix, ancient father of the elder time, would that Athene may give me strength and keep off the assault of darts. So would I well be fain to stand by Patroclus and to shield him, for his death touched me very close at heart. But Hector hath the terrible fury of fire, neither ceaseth in making havoc with his spear, for to him Zeus giveth glory." Thus spake he, and the bright-eyed goddess Athene was glad, for that to her, first of all the gods, whatsoever he prayed. Athene now puts strength into Menelaus, who now dares any Trojan to face him. And quickly one Trojan named Podes comes near Menelaus, too near and too slow, for although he had been accounted a good fighter, Menelaus makes quick work of him. Now Apollo comes to the Trojans to aid them as Athene is aiding the Greeks. And he comes, of course, to Hector, saying, "Hector, what other of the Achaeans will fear thee any more, if now thou hast shrunk from Menelaus, who formerly was an unhardy warrior? Now is he gone, and alone hath seized a dead Trojan from among our ranks, and hath slain thy faithful comrade, a good man among the fighters in the front, even Podes, son of Eetion." Thus spake he, and a black cloud of grief fell on Hector, and he went through the forefront of the battle, harnessed in flashing bronze. Then also the son of Cronos took up his tasseled aegis, glittering, and shrouded Ida in clouds, and lightened and thundered mightily, and shook the earth. Hector is once again fired up to fight. I can't imagine it's healthy physically or mentally to have the gods constantly filling you with battle rage. Standing too close to Hector at this moment is the Greek Peneleos, one of the Argonauts. I say standing too close because this battle rage of Apollo, the shaking of the aegis, this fills Peneleos with dread, and he turns to flee from the battle and is wounded in the attempt. Hector now wounds Leitos and is pursuing him to finish him off when Idomeneus intervenes, thrusting his spear at Hector's chest. But the armor of Achilles holds. Idomeneus' spear point breaks, and the Trojans cheer. Idomeneus leaps back onto his chariot as Hector strikes, but missing Idomeneus instead kills Koiranos, Meriones' chariot driver. Meriones gathers Koiranos' body into the chariot and says to Idomeneus, "Now lay on till thou come to the swift ships. Thyself too knowest that triumph is no longer with the Achaeans." Idomeneus lashes his reins, and he and Meriones, with the body of their companion Koiranos, leave the battle. Aias and Menelaus could definitely by now see that the tide of victory was now with the Trojans. Aias says to Menelaus, "Ay me, now may any man, even though he be a very fool, know that Father Zeus himself is helping the Trojans. For the darts of all of them strike, whosoever hurleth them, be he good man or bad. Zeus guideth them notwithstanding home, but all our darts fall only idly to the earth. Nay, come, let us ourselves devise some excellent means, that either we may hale the corpse away or ourselves return home to the joy of our friends, who grieve as they look hitherward and deem that no longer shall the fury of man-slaying Hector's unapproachable hand refrain itself, but fall upon the black ships. And would there were some comrade to carry tidings with all speed unto the son of Peleus, since I deem that he hath not even heard the grievous tidings, how his dear comrade is slain. But nowhere can I behold such an one among the Achaeans, for themselves and their horses likewise are wrapped in darkness. O Father Zeus, deliver thou the sons of the Achaeans from the darkness, and make clear sky, and vouchsafe sight unto our eyes. In the light be it that thou slayest us, since it is thy good pleasure that we die. Aias's main thought is that Achilles needs to be told that Patroclus is dead, but that this persistent darkness cast by Zeus, originally, remember, to honor the dead of Patroclus like a celestial burial shroud, this darkness is now preventing the Aiases and Menelaus from seeing their comrades who could help them get word through to Achilles. And they don't dare leave the body for even a moment, lest it be captured by the Trojans. The darkness, combined with Hector's Apollo-fueled rage, makes it seem to Aias that Zeus is against them, and Aias is despairing of their being able to accomplish even the simple task of notifying Achilles of this terrible news. And if you're thinking that Idomeneus, who just zoomed off in his chariot, is going to inform Achilles, you're wrong. I thought that too, but it's not the case. My only explanation for this is that the darkness is confined to a very small area just immediately around Patroclus's battle, so that while the two Aiases and Menelaus are enveloped in it, nearby where Hector and Idomeneus were facing off was outside the darkness, out in the daylight. Anyway, Zeus hears Aias's lamentations and agrees it's time to lift the darkness. The mist surrounding Patroclus's body dissipates, and the sun shines forth on them. Immediately, Aias's plan to notify Achilles is made manifest. He's looking for the youngest of the Achaean heroes, as he says now to Menelaus, "Look forth now, Menelaus, fosterling of Zeus, if haply thou mayest see Antilochus, yet alive, great-hearted Nestor's son, and rouse him to go with speed to wise Achilles, to tell him that his far dearest comrade is slain." Although reluctant to leave the body of Patroclus lest it be taken by the Trojans, Menelaus must agree with Aias that it's the young and speedy Antilochus who's their best chance to get word through to Achilles, because Menelaus, before leaving the defense of their fallen comrade, says to the other defenders, Iontes, leaders of the Argives, and Meriones, now let each remember the loving kindness of hapless Patroclus, for he would be gentle unto all while he was yet alive. Now death and fate have overtaken him. And with that, Menelaus is off, looking throughout the raging battle to find Antilochus, who, you'll remember, the narrator went out of their way recently to tell us hadn't yet heard that Patroclus had died. And eventually Menelaus does find Antilochus off on the left side of the battle, cheering on his comrades and presumably, although not explicitly, fighting as well. Menelaus now says to Antilochus, "Antilochus, fosterling of Zeus, come hither that thou mayest learn woeful tidings. Would it had never been. Ere now, I ween, thou too hast known by thy beholding that God rolleth mischief upon the Danaans, and with the Trojans is victory, and slain is the best man of the Achaeans, Patroclus. And great sorrow is wrought for the Danaans. But run thou to the ships of the Achaeans, and quickly tell this to Achilles, if haply he may straightway rescue to his ship the naked corpse, but his armor is held by Hector of the glancing helmet." Menelaus wants Antilochus to be their messenger to Achilles, but first Menelaus has to tell Antilochus the bad news that he wants the young man to convey. Thus spake he, and Antilochus had horror of the word he heard. And long time speechlessness possessed him, and his eyes were filled with tears, and his full voice choked. Yet for all this disregarded he not the bidding of Menelaus, but set him to run, when he has given his armor to a noble comrade, Laodocus, who close anigh him was wheeling his whole-hooved horses. So him his feet bare out of the battle, weeping, to Achilles son of Peleus, carrying an evil tale. With his armor off, Antilochus will make a much faster runner. Menelaus goes back to Meriones and the Aiases, aka the Iantes, still defending the Battle of Patroclus. But before he leaves the left side of the battle, he ensures that Nestor's other son, Thrasymedes, is there to lead the Pylians in the absence of Antilochus. Back at the center of battle, Menelaus reports to the others that Antilochus is off, and soon Achilles will know the grim news. But he expresses doubt over whether Achilles will even be able to join the battle, now that his armor is in the hands, or rather on the body of, Hector. And because he doesn't think that Achilles will be able to come and help them rescue the body of Patroclus out of the battle, Menelaus insists that they come up with some plan now to secure their friend's remains once and for all. Telamonian Aias agrees and has this plan to secure Patroclus. Menelaus and Meriones will carry the body, while the two Aiases will retreat right behind them, walking backwards, defending them each step of the way as they all work their way back. And as soon as Menelaus and Meriones pick up Patroclus, the Trojan host behind cried aloud when they saw the Achaeans lifting the corpse, and charged like hounds that spring in front of hunter youths upon a wounded wild boar, and for a while run in haste to rend him. But when he wheeleth round among them, trusting in his might, then they give ground and shrink back here and there. Thus for a while the Trojans pressed on with all their power, striking with swords and double-headed spears. But when the Iantes turned about and halted over against them, then they changed color, and none dared farther onset to do battle around the dead. With the two Aiases fighting side by side as they so often do, the Trojans lose hope that they will be able to secure this prize, whose securing would have so demoralized the Greeks. Thus were those twain struggling to bear the corpse out of the battle toward the hollow ships, but the stress of war waxed fierce upon them as fire that leapeth on a city of men, and bursteth into sudden blaze, and houses perish amid the mighty glare, and it roareth beneath the strength of the wind. Thus roared the unceasing din of horses and of fighting men against the bearers as they went. And behind them the two Iantes held their ground, as a woody ridge that chanceth to stretch all its length across the plain holdeth back a flood, and stayeth even the wasting streams of mighty rivers, and turneth all their current wandering onto the plain. Neither doth the violence of their stream break through it. Thus ever the Iantes kept back the Trojans' battle, but they pressed hard anigh, and among them twain the first, even Aeneas, Anchises' son, and glorious Hector, and thickly fell the goodly arms about and around the trench, as the Danaans fled, and there was never a pause of fight. The desperate plan works. Defended by the two Aiases, Menelaus and Meriones have carried Patroclus' body back to the ruins of the Greek defenses, and seemingly out of Hector's reach. Book 17 ends here. In Book 18, we'll witness Achilles' reaction to the loss of his dearest, his reason for living. Will he fall into despair, or will he fight? But if he's to fight, how will he go into battle now that his armor has been lost? Tune in again next time when we'll cover Book 18, one of the most critical books of the Iliad, and home to my personal favorite scene. A scene of such harrowing beauty and terror that, to my mind, it represents the whole epic scope of the Iliad. Till next time, this has been Daniel with Your Mythology Book Club. Thanks for listening.